We're going to talk a bit more about all of this now with Middle East expert and author Anne Irfan. Thanks so much, Anne, for taking the time to join us. You are also the author of the book, A Short History of the Gaza Strip. Just first of all, give us a bit more about the historical context of all of these announcements coming now.
Thank you. Well, this is coming on the back of really decades of attempts by the Palestinian leadership to gain recognition, particularly at the UN. So the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, first went to the UN in 1974 under the previous leader, Yasser Arafat, and it gained a status there, although not full statehood, later that year. So that's 1974. As you said in your report, the vast majority of UN member states actually recognize the state of Palestine already, in some cases a long time ago. So although these moves of recognition by predominantly Western states now are obviously extremely welcome, they are coming really very late in the day. And it's striking that many of the states that are now recognizing Palestine have been saying for about 30 years that they support a two-state solution, which begs the question, if you've been supporting a two-state solution for 30 years, why has it taken you so long to recognize one of the supposed states?
So what's the answer to that question? What has been taking so long?
Well, we would probably need to ask them, but it's essentially been down to a lack of political will. In fact, even earlier this year, the UK government was refusing to give a definitive answer as to whether they would recognize Palestine. It was fairly late in the day. The Israeli government has been more or less led by Netanyahu since 2009, other than a very short period in 2022. And Netanyahu, ever since his first premiership in the 1990s, made it very clear that he was opposed to any existence of a Palestinian state. And in recent years, that has become even more overtly the policy and the stance of Israel. And the US has essentially backed it. So we can essentially ascribe the explanation to international politics and a reluctance on the part of many European states in particular to diverge from the US on this until now.
Right. So the big question, it seems to me, is are these states that are currently recognizing Palestine going to back it up in any other way than what they're doing now at the UN?
Yeah, that is the big question, because as you said in your report, then this is essentially a symbolic move, albeit one of significance. Its consequences are going to be fairly limited on the ground, other than things like, the Palestinian consulate being upgraded to embassies in some of these capitals. But so far, none of these states have said that they're going to back up the recognition with moves like, say, sanctions against Israel or any real change in their policies. The only state we've seen do that so far in the recent period is Spain, which recognized Palestine last year and did then follow up with some sanctions. But we haven't heard anything from any of the states this week to that effect so far.
Indeed. I mean, because, of course, the Trump administration is very close to Israel. I mean, what really can be done when the U.S. and their veto are there?
Well, you're right that in terms of full UN recognition of Palestine, the US veto at the Security Council stands in the way. And indeed, the US used its veto as recently as last year to prevent Palestinian statehood being approved by the Security Council. But that doesn't mean that there's nothing other states can do. I mean, sanctions would certainly have an effect if placed on Israel by really long-standing allies in the West. There are mounting concerns among at least some in Israel about this increasing fear that it is going to turn into a pariah state on the world stage. So it's simply not true that these states have no leverage. And of course, in the case of the UK, many Palestinians have pointed out that the recognition is essentially a corrective to the UK's historical responsibility for Palestinian dispossession, which dates back to 1917 with the Balfour Declaration.
Well, what about inside the United States? Is everyone, all the Republicans, are they on side with Donald Trump when it comes to Israel? I mean, there were these recent comments from U.S. envoy Tom Barrack saying Israel is not an ally and that it does not have shared interests with the U.S. in the Middle East. What do you make of that?
Well, We're not seeing much concrete evidence that in terms of actual policy, which we have to remember when it comes to foreign policy in the US, it's largely dictated by the White House. We're seeing little to no evidence that there's going to be much rupture. We do know that Trump has, in recent months, sometimes become quite frustrated with the Netanyahu government. We saw that spilling out, obviously, in his intervention over the Israeli war with Iran in the summer. But certainly on the question of recognition, the Trump administration have been fairly strident in their opposition to recognition and in standing quite close to the Netanyahu government on this. I would also point out that while I've spoken a lot about the Netanyahu government, actually the opposition to the recognition of Palestine has really been a consensus position across the political spectrum in Israel. So pretty much every political leader, including those who are considered to fall on the center left in Israel, have spoken out against this. So it's pretty much a unity position politically in Israel.
In the meantime, Israel's offensive on Gaza continues. Is there any way the situation on the ground could evolve now that there is more of this recognition, even if it is symbolic, or do we need something else?
That is going to come down once again to the question of whether, as you said earlier, whether these states are going to back up their symbolic recognition with real action. So are we going to see, say, suspension of arms sales to Israel? Are we going to see sanctions? Are we going to see push for the entrance of humanitarian aid or support for legal action against Israel in the international courts? At the moment, we're not seeing any of that.
All right. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us, Anne Irfan, Middle East expert. Thank you very much.
Thank you.